All right, and finally we've reached the last part of our three-part series talking about ground reaction forces, which one's best for you, and how do we actually change and understand these things a little bit better. So now that we're talking about horizontal force, we've really gotten to the meat and potatoes of this, because if there's one force that we typically see golfers trying to utilize too much, it is the horizontal force. So let's start with a definition of what horizontal force is. And horizontal force is us pushing our bodies towards the target and away from the target. And this is really, really important because when we think about this, this is one of our main braking systems within the structure of the body. So we know that the golf shaft isn't rigid. So if it's not rigid, then we need something to act on this shaft and kick the kick point of the shaft. So part of that is creating a nice balanced horizontal force, meaning that I have the same amount of push towards the target as I do away. So in theory, that would work really, really well. But we also know that we don't want to return the shaft back to vertical. We want to create some forward shaft lean. So that means that we have to move low point slightly forward and have a pressure shift. So even though we're talking about horizontal force, we're also going to need to make sure that we're also creating a little bit of torque and rotation in there as well, to be able to really use that well, because like we've talked about, the shift happens, then the torque. So they butt up against one another. So it's very difficult to have a conversation about one without the other. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to create is we want to have more break, meaning that our left leg or our lead leg as a right-handed golfer is pushing more away from the target than my lead leg is pushing towards. Because when my lead side does all the pushing and I don't have any break, just like in the car, we run into things. And typically what we run into is our left hip, which is why you see so many golfers really running in to the side bend blues, to where they really get their spine tilting too far back, and it really creates kind of that Joaquin Niemann look to where we get a lot of side bended impact. So the reason that's happening is because we have too much horizontal force pushing us towards the target and not enough horizontal force coming out of our lead side, stabilizing our pelvis, so that our spine can rotate against our lower body. So I hope that kind of helps understand the definition. So now once again, how do we apply this to golf? How do we make this simpler? How do we make it more actionable? So that's where we kind of want to jump in with some drills to kind of help people understand, most importantly, how to generally slow down the horizontals, because like I said earlier, we tend to see a lot of horizontals. So how do we minimize some of this so that we could take advantage of the torque and the horizontal force with better timing? So what do we need to do? What's the simplest way? Well, the number one thing that I tend to see out of new and beginner golfers, or even better golfers who struggle with kind of controlling low point, is we really think as humans that if we get wider with our base, that's going to make us way more sturdy and we're going to make a better golf swing from here. But what actually happens is as I separate my feet, I'm actually creating more space for my center of mass to move side to side. So the more I separate my feet, the more I'm going to feel inclined to try to find those feet with my upper body, and that's going to really lead to a lot of horizontal force. So what we want to make sure we're doing is we want to make sure that we feel like we're able to stop ourselves with that lead leg and keep our chest nice and tall. So to do that, we're going to narrow up the stance and see how that does for us. So we know that we can play around with stance width, which is very simple, pre-swing, to change horizontal force. So what we need to first figure out is, do you need to change the horizontal force? So in addition to understanding the drill we would do to minimize, let's find out if we need to minimize. So very simply, all we're going to do is we're going to try something, and it's just kind of a funsy. I don't want anybody to have any pressure on themselves when they do this, but we're just going to hit some golf balls, and what we're going to do is we're going to kind of mess around. So we're going to hit a few golf shots with our feet together, okay, just making nice easy swings, and what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of pulp blart this, and we're going to observe and report. Okay, so hit 3, 4, 5 shots, feet together, and just kind of see what that looks like. Is that what you want the ball to do? Does that look like what you're trying to accomplish? If so, great, but let's try a couple other things. So the next thing we're going to try is we're going to have our feet together, but then we're just going to pick up our right foot and stand on our left. And we're just going to make some golf swings from here, hitting the ball. And once again, we're just going to observe and report, and then do the exact same thing off just the right foot. This one's terrible for me, so don't laugh. I am definitely a lead leg dominant golfer. Okay, you can see I can barely keep my balance using my right leg. And now all of a sudden, we have a pretty good idea. So if you hit the ball best using just your right leg, guess what? You probably need some horizontal force because you're probably using your right leg a bit more. However, if you hit the ball better from just your lead side, which a lot of golfers will tend to do, it might be a good idea to start looking at your stance width and narrowing that up when you're out playing golf, because we could be getting set up so wide that we're just using all horizontal and then not able to take advantage of that torque. So just like we talked about vertical force and torque, we're going to talk about what some of the best players in the world do with this horizontal. And I think it's really interesting, and it's also kind of a cool case study when we look at how long drive is different than normal golf, right? So when we look at Kyle Berkshire, we can see here that his horizontal force, or the purple at the top here, is really on for a long time. So when you look at the yellow torque spike and the blue vertical force spike, we see that they're over a short period of time, which is what makes them spiky. But when we look at Kyle's horizontal force, we can see it's on for a long time, and he's kind of using it more kind of as a constant and trying to kind of manage the center, right? And trying to twist around that middle versus really trying to make it move like he does with his rock. So generally, I think the thought for Kyle may be, and I don't know this for certain, but I would almost guess that when he rocks, the idea is that he has to twist in between the rocks. And that's kind of how he's managing that horizontal force, given that he's still trying to take advantage of it because he's trying to hit one as far as he can and utilize all three ground reaction forces. All right, so now we've seen how Kyle Berkshire does it with his pronounced, kind of trigger where he gets the body rocking. So now what happens when we actually have to hit the ball really solid and off the ground as well and use clubs other than the driver? So now we're looking at Brian Gay, like we talked about, still a very, very good player at very high speeds, much higher than the average, but more comparable to us. So when we look here at the horizontal force for Brian, we see that it's right about the tour average. But when we look at his torque and his vertical force, we also see that they are there. But when we look at the vertical force component to his swing, we see that there's a double peak there. So when we look at how Brian's creating a lot of horizontal force, there could actually be a potential there to lower the horizontal force to get rid of that double peak. So I know that Brian has gained a lot of speed, and this looks to be an older video, and unfortunately we don't have the launch monitor data, but I would imagine that this is probably pre the big speed gains for Brian, and I would imagine that they've cleaned that up, and that's why Brian's been able to go from being one of the slower people on tour to being one of the more average or slightly above average. And I think he's up to like 118 or 120 miles an hour, and going from 108, 110 to like 120 and being able to still hit enough fairways to keep your tour card is pretty impressive. So that's one of the cool things that we can do by tweaking these forces, is really help people see some massive gains when generally in video we wouldn't see that so clearly. So we hope you find this helpful. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, like, share, all those good things. And if you want to follow along, find us on the social media sites at Measured Golf, the Force Plate Guy, and the Golf Biomechist.